Hey there, do you like Marvel? Do you like the MCU? Do you like phases 1, 2, and 3? Cool, so do I. But here's a real question. Do you like phase 4? Well, don't answer that, because if you're like me, then you probably feel like an overweight kid at a chocolate factory getting sucked in a tube filled with the amount of Marvel movies, shows, and games releasing for what it feels like every week or so. Now, they're games I don't have a problem with right now, and if you saw my previous video, I talked specifically about why they're doing better than DC is. My issue so far with Marvel is quite frankly to do with the recent releases of shows and especially films. You see, Marvel movies releasing in theaters felt like an event during the phase 2 days, and that is reflected in their ever-growing box office numbers, critical reception, and dominance over the film industry. So what happened? Why is there such animosity towards MCU movies now? One obvious factor is that the quality of phase 4 has been lowered significantly compared to the previous phases. Before, we had movies like Winter Soldier and Guardians of the Galaxy. Now we're getting movies like Thor: Love and Thunder and the latest Ant-Man movie. But then again, that's too easy. Just me saying, oh, movie bad, haha, isn't really cutting it for me. In my opinion, there are two factors that are contributing heavily into why the MCU right now is dog water. The first factor is being lack of focus. Back during phase 1, the MCU had this novelty to it in the sense that we never really had a series of movies from different franchises that could connect to each other in a grand way. They took their time to plan out and outline the first set of films and how these movies will connect and build from each other, from Iron Man 1 to Avengers. They kept it simple and had decided on Loki being the threat, and it paid off big time as Avengers went on to gross $1.5 billion at the box office and changed the entire movie industry forever. Phase 2 improved on the formula from phase 1 while also continuing to build off the foundation of its previous phase. Also, they introduced new characters that served a greater purpose from the overall story of the MCU. Guardians of the Galaxy had Thanos as a big threat, which the Guardians would eventually have to overcome, and Ant-Man introduced a quantum realm, which sets up what happens in Endgame. Marvel knew where the overall story was heading and even announced Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, which at the time was announced as part 2, as well as their entire phase 3 slate. From Iron Man 3 to Captain America Winter Soldier to Thor Ragnarok, Marvel slowly but surely built up these movies not just as films to watch by themselves, but as movies that can serve a greater purpose for the overall MCU narrative. Phase 4, however, is a completely different story, unfortunately, as we're already on to Phase 5 with Ant-Man, and we have no idea where these movies are heading or leading up to. Yes, I know Phase 4 is setting up the multiverse, however, we don't really know as the audience who the threat is until Loki, and how Loki even affects movies like No Way Home or Multiverse of Madness, because quite frankly, what happens in No Way Home doesn't really line up with what happens in Loki and what it set up. Furthermore, Black Widow felt like it was only made to introduce Yelena as a replacement, and honestly so did the Hawkeye show with Kate Bishop, because neither of them felt like they can stand on their own as a quality movie or show. This setup just feels too cluttered and complicated that it makes following the overall story of this universe just tiresome to follow. You can see this with just how the reception has been in social media. Listen, I'm not suggesting that Marvel movies need to only be lead-ups and prioritize a greater cinematic universe. No, not at all. But what made the Infinity Saga so good was that they can do both. For example, Winter Soldier was a great movie, but the events that took place in it helped set up movies like Civil War, which in turn helped set up movies like Infinity War and Endgame. Phase 4 feels like it's just doing one or the other, with some few exceptions like Shang-Chi or No Way Home. This leads me to my next big issue and the most important factor as to why the MCU has been in the shitter recently. They're releasing way too much content to the point where it seems like Marvel Studios can't even seem to handle how much they're releasing. This is a problem I noticed back in 2016 when they released Civil War. Now mind you, Civil War is still a great movie and the production quality is still top notch, but I'm sure you've seen the criticisms involving the airport fight scene. That was the first instance of the Marvel CGI debacle that I and many others have encountered, as more and more videos about the lack of visual quality in Marvel has been having in their films. This issue just kept becoming more and more apparent when they expanded to 3 movies a year. Movies like Spider-Man Homecoming, Thor Ragnarok, and Black Panther began showcasing signs of poor VFX work done in some scenes. However, it seems at the time Marvel can manage making 3 movies a year, even if it's at the cost of some of their movies themselves not looking as good as they did. Phase 4 expanded even more as they introduced shows as a part of their release slate, and now it's become almost common knowledge how badly Marvel VFX have been since 2021. Black Widow, Shang-Chi, Spider-Man No Way Home, Thor: Love and Thunder, and now Ant-Man have been memed and mocked online for how bad they looked in comparison to how movies were before, and this is just one area of how this bloated release of films have been damaging Marvel. Keep in mind that due to this issue, Kevin Feige now has to hire a team of people to help him manage all these projects, whereas before he would just produce these movies hands-on himself. It's for that reason why we got guys like Jon Favreau, the Russo brothers, James Gunn, Scott Derrickson, Ryan Coogler, and many others who seemed like a great match making these projects to critical and commercial success. Feige was allowed to work with them for extended periods of time in order to make the best movie possible. Audience burnout and superhero movie fatigue now has been more noticeable as opposed to before, Putting out an MCU movie every few months is a lot to ask for the general moviegoer, let alone adding multiple TV shows we now have to consume in order to understand what's going on. I feel like Disney has taken note of this, and it looks like they seem to be spreading out their release schedules, but what they need to do is go back to making 2 movies per year like they were doing in phase 2. This is the sweet spot in terms of having enough movies a year to look forward to and prevents audience burnout. Many believe that Marvel Studios should have stopped after Endgame, and while I don't personally believe that, this obsession of releasing shows and movies isn't doing them any favors. Marvel can go back to the level of quality they have had if Marvel can improve on these 2 issues I mentioned, because today they have their most popular characters on their corner, and with WB and DC looking at their new cinematic universe, Marvel has time to reevaluate and go back to what makes them great in the first place.